You're in the shower, the water's running, and somewhere between shampooing your hair and reaching for the soap, you win an argument. A perfect, devastating, beautifully articulate argument against someone about something that happened 3 years ago. You say exactly what you should have said, right now, in your head, with full confidence, and for a moment, it feels real. Or maybe it's not an argument. Maybe it's a conversation with your crush that goes exactly the way you want it to. Or a job interview where you're effortlessly brilliant. Or a confrontation you've been avoiding for months, except in your head, you handle it with the calm of a therapist and the wit of a late-night host. Sound familiar? Maybe it's you. Maybe it's someone you know very well. Suspiciously well. Here's the thing. This isn't daydreaming. This isn't you being unproductive. The real question isn't just why it happens, it's why it happens again and again and again. Why it feels like an addiction? Because neurologically, it kind of is. Here's where the neuroscience earns its place. Dr. Moshe Bar, a cognitive neuroscientist at Harvard Medical School, has spent years studying what the brain does when it simulates future or alternative scenarios. What he found is striking. The brain doesn't just passively imagine, it rewards itself for imagining. Every time you construct a vivid mental scenario, especially one where you feel seen, powerful, loved, or safe, your brain releases a small hit of dopamine. Not because the thing happened, but because the brain processed it as possible. This is the core mechanism. Dopamine isn't just the pleasure chemical, it's the anticipation chemical. It fires hardest not when you get the reward, but when you expect you might. So the moment your brain starts building a scenario with a satisfying ending, it begins releasing dopamine in real time. You feel the reward before the scene even plays out. And then, just like any other dopamine loop, your brain files it under "do that again." That's the addiction. You're not weak, you're not delusional. You are running a neurological feedback loop that your brain genuinely cannot distinguish from a real experience, which is fascinating and slightly terrifying. Now, who does this and what are they actually trying to get? The rehearsal fighter. Picture this. Someone at work says something dismissive in a meeting. You smile, you nod, you say nothing. But for the next 6 hours, in the car, at dinner, lying in bed, you destroy them, verbally, eloquently, with facts, emotion, and just the right amount of controlled fury. Psychologists call this retrofitting, the brain returning to an emotionally unresolved moment and rewriting it with the outcome it needed. The nervous system experienced a threat, social humiliation, feeling dismissed, being unseen, and it never got resolved in real time. So the brain does what it's wired to do. It closes the loop, artificially, but effectively enough to release the tension. The imaginary argument isn't ego, it's regulation. But here's the honest question worth sitting with. Are you using these rehearsals to process the emotion or to avoid the real conversation entirely? For some people, the mental version becomes so satisfying the actual confrontation never happens. And that gap between the world inside your head and the one you're actually living starts to quietly widen until one day you realize you've been handling things for years without handling a single thing. The romantic scriptwriter. Then there's this type. You probably know them. You might be them. They meet someone interesting, a stranger on the train, a new coworker, someone who liked their photo twice, and within 48 hours there is a full relationship. Inside jokes that don't exist yet, a version of this person who is, coincidentally, perfect, who somehow never has bad days, conflicting needs, or the specific annoying habit that will eventually surface around month 3. This isn't delusion. This is the attachment system running at full speed. Research on anxious attachment, stemming largely from the foundational work of John Bowlby and later Mary Ainsworth, shows that people whose early attachment bonds were unpredictable learned to pre-construct relationships as a form of emotional safety. If I already know how this goes, I can't be blindsided. I can't be abandoned. I am, in some sense, in control. The cruel irony? The real person never had a chance. They're competing with a version of themselves that lives rent-free in someone else's imagination. A version with no contradictions, no bad moods, no complexity. And when reality shows up, as it always does, it registers as disappointment, even when the actual person is wonderful. The fantasy isn't the problem. The pattern it's protecting you from is. The anxiety architect. Here's where it gets darker. Some people don't rehearse victories. They rehearse disasters. They're in a perfectly calm moment, eating lunch, nothing wrong, and their brain quietly begins constructing a catastrophe. What if I lose the job? What if that headache is serious? What if I say the wrong thing tomorrow and everyone finally realizes? This is anxiety doing exactly what it was designed to do: scan for threats and prepare for them. And here's the neurological detail that makes it worse. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, cannot distinguish between a real danger and a vividly imagined one. A scenario detailed enough to feel emotionally real activates the same physiological stress response as an actual emergency. Heart rate, cortisol, muscle tension, all of it, for something that hasn't happened and probably won't. The cruelest part? It feels like preparation. It feels productive. The anxiety architect believes they are doing something responsible, covering every angle, protecting against every outcome. What they're actually doing is suffering in advance, paying an emotional tax on a future that almost certainly won't arrive in the form they've imagined. They aren't broken. They are hypervigilant, often brilliant at anticipating problems, often the person in the room who sees what everyone else misses. But nobody ever taught them the difference between useful foresight and the compulsive habit of moving disasters from the future into the present and living inside them as if they've already happened. That's not preparation. That's a haunting. The unfinished person. You're sitting at your desk. Same job, same commute, same lunch, possibly. And somewhere in the middle of a completely ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a feeling moves through you. Not sadness exactly, not anxiety either, something closer to the specific ache of knowing there is a version of your life that is more yours than the one you are currently living, more real somehow, even though it doesn't exist yet. And so your brain does what it always does. It builds it. Not for escape, not for entertainment, out of longing. In research on what psychologists call possible selves, a concept developed by Hazel Marcus and Paula Nurius, the brain doesn't just store who you are, it actively maintains vivid, emotionally charged representations of who you could be. The self who finally wrote the thing, had the conversation, built the life, left, stayed, chose. These aren't idle fantasies. They are motivational architecture, the brain's way of holding a future self close enough to feel real, close enough to move toward. Here is where it gets complicated. Because the dopamine loop doesn't care whether you took the real step or just imagined it. The reward fires either way. Which means you can spend years in that Tuesday afternoon feeling, rehearsing the life with enough vividness and emotional detail that it registers in your nervous system as progress, as movement, when the distance between you and the thing you want hasn't changed at all. The unfinished person isn't lazy. They aren't even afraid. They are caught in the most seductive trap the brain sets for itself. A simulation so convincing, it quietly replaces the thing it was supposed to inspire. The fantasy is not the enemy. The fantasy is the compass. The only question is whether you've been reading it or just holding it in your hand because it feels good to know which direction is north. The grief replayer. And then, quietly, and with more tenderness than any of the others, there's this one. They replay conversations with people who are gone. A parent, a friend, a relationship that ended badly or too soon, or without the right words. They imagine what they would say now. They finish old arguments differently. They say the things they never got to say when there was still time. This is not pathology. This is one of the most human things a nervous system can do. Grief, psychologically, is an attachment bond that has nowhere left to go. The brain spent years, sometimes decades, building an internal model of that person. Their voice, their reactions, the specific way they made you feel seen or small or loved. That model doesn't disappear when the person does. The brain keeps reaching, keeps generating scenarios, because that's the only language it knows for maintaining connection. The imaginary conversations aren't denial. They are love, still running, with nowhere to land. And over time, slowly, non-linearly, often painfully, those scenarios shift from raw grief to something softer, something closer to gratitude. That shift is called integration, and it is the brain healing exactly as it was designed to. The replaying isn't the problem. The replaying is the process. So here you are, 5 profiles, 5 different reasons the brain builds worlds that don't exist. The rehearsal fighter, closing loops the world left open. The romantic scriptwriter, writing love stories before the other person has spoken. The anxiety architect, living in futures that haven't arrived. The unfinished person, rehearsing an identity still in progress. The grief replayer, keeping a connection alive the only way still available. What they share isn't dysfunction. What they share is a brain doing its job, protecting, preparing, connecting, processing. The scenarios are never random. They are always pointing at something real, a need that isn't met, a wound that isn't closed, a future that hasn't been built yet, a loss that hasn't been fully held. The neuroscience is clear. Your brain rewards the simulation because it cannot tell the difference between the imagined and the real. That loop is not a flaw in your wiring. It is the wiring. The only question worth asking, the one that actually changes anything, is this. What is the scenario trying to show you? And are you brave enough to take that somewhere real? Drop in the comments which one you recognized in yourself. And if someone in your life came to mind during any of these, share this with them. Sometimes the most useful thing isn't explaining someone, it's just letting them feel understood.